Hi everyone, if you're joining, just jump in, say hello, send some of your comments or questions. Or you can tweet at TranscribeSI with your questions. And I am live transcribing and sharing. Hello.
Hi.
We have Rick from Smithsonian Institution Archives off screen. You're the first participant.
Maybe I'm the first participant?
You are. You can
Cool.
jump in here.
Who's hanging out?
So far, it's the two of us.
Woohoo!
So we have lots of feedback from many of our volunteers already. And I just want to embed this tweet if possible so people can find us. Transcription Center. All right.
So if I do hashtag volunteer, I should find it, right?
Volunteers with an S. Volunteers.
Favorite, retweet.
And this is one of those preaching to the choir, but if you're already here, you don't need this, but anyone else who's visiting the Transcription Center homepage will find the link to this Google Hangout right now.
So Heidi's got something in here.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
And all of our volunteers who have liked us on Google Plus should have received an invitation for this as well.
I need to like us on Google Plus.
Yeah, like us.
Oops, let's write that down.
I'll add you to our volunteer circle. So our plan is, once we get some more people in here, we'll have a chat about the issues that have been reported, recurring issues in transcription, and we will also maybe have a stab at some solutions. Rick will ask questions about your interests and preferences in the end result of the transcription.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've tried to give feedback that some units have different needs, so we're trying to come up with best solutions for needs that would allow, so we have consistency in our transcriptions, even if that means that they're not exactly what the unit wants. We can work with that and make some recommendations for participating organizations as well. Excuse me. And then from that, I'll make some guidelines and share them back out with everyone, and maybe we can do some revisions on our tips and instructions.
Sounds great.
So I see at least someone else is viewing. Hello. If you're viewing and you're not a part of Twitter or Facebook already, you're welcome to send us an email directly to transcribe@si.edu if you have questions, and I can repeat your questions, read them out to the group as well.
And Siobhan is telling people to come.
Great. Welcome, everyone. I can see people joining in, at least viewing. You may find if you're viewing from the Google Hangout window, you'll see on the left-hand side a column of nice little icons that allow you to participate in different ways. If you click on the second one down, which is a blue box with writing on it, you can join a group chat. You can put in some of your questions in the Google chat there. And I'll also check in try to check in with the YouTube page and see if there are any comments on the YouTube page as well. So.
In the Google Hangout.
There I am, delayed. No comments yet. That was like double reality. That's breaking a fifth wall, fourth wall.
It's the sixth dimension.
The sixth dimension. Well, I'll go ahead and start talking about some of the Transcription Center tips that we already have in place in the Transcription Center, and making some comments about some of the questions that I've heard over the last few months with transcribing. In particular, ones that I have heard have to do with the question of putting end page and start page when you have 2 pages on an image, and then also questions about some of the stylistic formatting. So, Rick, would you mind speaking to the use of end page and start page on the pages that you received back? So you have several projects as a part of the Fieldbook project, Fieldbook registry and Fieldbook project materials, and also SIA materials that have 2 images in the scan.
Especially the smaller Fieldbooks have those 2 pages as a single image. And more often than not, the individuals are writing down the left side of the page and then moving to the right side and then writing down that page. And that is the most common scenario and lends itself really well to double square bracket, left page, double square bracket, and right page. The brackets are helping us identify in terms of taking the transcription and indexing it, markings on the page that are not actually words to be indexed. So that is helpful to us. What's more important, because of how people transcribe things, then there's a desire to just continue with the words all the way across both pages, is that double square bracket end page, double square bracket, followed by a double square bracket start page, to signify that you're moving to the right side of the image. That's what's most important, and if people are consistent, that's great. But left page, right page will also work. It's not. If I were reviewing an image, I would not change it if it was set up as left page, right page. What's most important is where you have somebody like Rock who writes across both the left and the right page, so he treats the 2 pages as if they're a single page, is to not see that kind of page notation in there. It should be treated the way that the person writing the work treated that. So even though it's 2 physical pages, we should treat it as a single page.
Right, so as they're viewing it. And then from your perspective, how this is useful in for searching and indexing, or for, in essence, we're trying to continue to keep this practice of end page and start page, even though we're thinking about it in.
Yeah, end page, start page is ideal, and that's easiest rather than having to keep track of left and right.
Right.
It's kind of machine. The machine doesn't have to worry about what left and right signify. But in terms of what we're doing with that data, is we're really, the idea behind the square brackets is this needs personal attention in the case of a word that is mostly discernible but not completely, or in the case of there's a physical kind of distinction of left versus right.
Right.
But in terms of indexing the content, in terms of a researcher coming in and looking for a particular topic, they're not going to be concerned with the end page, start page.
Right.
Right, and I guess that's the biggest thing. Is the reason we want help getting these transcribed is to make this more accessible to everybody who wants to.
Hi, Siobhan, we see you. Hello, welcome.
Hi, sorry, I am definitely just trying to work this out, sorry.
It's okay.
It's a Google new person.
Right, so if you are new to Google+, or if you're watching the video, you'll find that if someone speaks, it draws the camera to them. So Siobhan, when you say something, it will draw the camera to you.
Okay.
You'll pop up on the screen.
Right.
So hopefully you've been able to hear what we've been talking about so far?
Yes, yep, well, whilst being distracted by technology.
Right. Well, us too. I think Rick was trying to speak as I was maneuvering the screen and trying to link people in on this.
Yeah.
So that's a great answer to the question about the use of that.
It's kind of long-winded, but I guess what I really want to get across is it's the text and how it's organized on the page,
Right.
but most of all the actual text that we want to make accessible.
Right. We want the text to be able to be searched easily. So some of the double bracketed words that we're including maybe seem that they're excessive, but they create a distinction, a gap that's not necessary for the computer, but is necessary for a researcher. We're trying to find the perfect match of both spaces for those, or the perfect matchup for both of those needs, I guess. So Siobhan, I'll move on to some of the comments that you sent because they actually replicate some things that some of the other volunteers have fed in. One in particular is the issue of using a caret and then the double brackets for inserted text.
Yeah.
When you've been reviewing or approving materials, how has that fed in? So this is usually the case in something that's a typewritten text where they have inserted additional comments. And we're trying to, I guess, find some consensus on that practice.
It can also be where someone's, obviously writing quite a bit and then goes back and reviews it themselves and then adds in descriptive words, for example. So it's all in the same pen handwriting, but it's obviously a later insertion, or it could have been done, they finished the sentence. You know what it's like when you're writing a letter, you finish the sentence, you've forgotten a word, and they just want to put it in.
Right.
But there's obviously not a consistent way that people transcribe it through the different projects. Different people do it different ways.
Right. Let me just pause here to say, anyone else who has joined in to view the Google Hangout, and if you're not able to talk with us and join us, go ahead and tweet us at transcribesi, or you can email transcribe@si.edu, and we'll bring in your comments as well. Hopefully we can get some feedback on the process of reviewing. So Siobhan, I know you've done a lot of reviewing. Did you find either a particular approach was consistent in? I know there are inconsistencies.
Some people do the transcription way that's actually for indicating that it's handwritten text rather than printed text for an insertion, and I actually think that can end up to be very confusing, especially if you've got an insertion in typewritten text that's a handwritten text, but it's also an insertion. So it's like you've got to almost double up on it, and it's not automatically, it's just not consistent. It's not consistent, and it's not easily read. Whereas I found, although the transcription, double brackets transcription and then hash transcription way is a bit long-winded, at least it's consistent, and again you've got the separation of the text, so you can actually see where someone has actually inserted a word, which might possibly be interested if people want to do linguistics on it or handwriting research. I don't know what people are going to do with this once we've transcribed it, so I'm trying to do a way that can be used for everybody.
Right, that's exactly the point. I have had questions as well from other people saying, well, surely if the person has stricken out a word, they didn't want that word in the final record. However, from a researching perspective, it's very important sometimes that that a researcher maybe discovered that they had inadvertently mislabeled an item, that kind of process of discovery within the field notes or within an entry, a manuscript is important as well.
Well, and manuscript is a great example. So if we're talking about humanities scholarship, the way that somebody thought of phrasing something and then decided to change that is a really important aspect of the research that's done. So we like seeing that that's being captured by the people who are transcribing. I would say with regards to insertions, that they are important to capture and to capture in the flow of where they occur. So if I had, the barn and I wanted to insert red, then what I'd like to see in the transcription is the bracket insertion red, close bracket. It might be super nice if there was an indication as to whether the insertion was above the line or below the line, because sometimes people insert from below the line, and so as I'm going to proof, just knowing where I'm...
I very rarely come across an insertion underneath. In fact, I can't actually think of an insertion where someone has put an insertion underneath. Possibly the only one I can actually think of would, even then, the Smithsonian, the Africa, the presidential project where the president sent people off to Africa.
Roosevelt expedition.
Yeah. There's the occasional one in there, but the majority of the things I've done, all the insertions are at the top. If you're lucky, you get the little arrow that indicates that they've gone to the top. It just tends to be how people insert things into text. But I can see why you want to know if they inserted below, because it would be so unusual.
Right.
Right, it would be unusual, and I don't expect to see that very often.
The Africa.
Heidi.
Hi, Heidi.
Oh,
If
hi.
you Google Hangout when you talk, then you become the big picture.
That's right.
Oh, I'm doing some weird things here. I'm trying not to interrupt.
No worries. So I think this point that we're getting to is, for me, I will derail the conversation for a moment to say that it's interesting to me because it indicates whether or not we are describing what's happening on the pages or whether we're creating text that's happening, the text that is just the searchable text. And all of that information is important as a researcher, depending on what perspective you're researching, what sorts of things you're exploring.
Let me just say, the initial idea behind this when we were creating was to get the text to be searchable. But it became very clear as we were looking at the material to put into the transcription center that how it's written and how it's structured on the page is really valuable information, and we need to capture that as well.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say, and Siobhan, you mentioned this a little bit, is that it's really important when you have an insertion, if you know that it's different handwriting, for that to be identified. Because
see, I had no idea you guys wanted that. Right.
M.W. Gorman is a great example. So he did collecting in the southeast Alaska. Yeah. And there are also some specimens of his that are in the transcription as well. Mm-hmm. But his field book, the botanists refer to him as a collector, not a botanist. And as you go through, you'll actually see notations in there where somebody's gone through his field book and identified where he was wrong and made correct. And so that's kind of interesting to know. But that says that what you're looking at has actually had, the original author and then somebody else who's kind of reviewed and edited that work as well before it actually got into the transcription center.
Okay, all right. So how would you like us to transcribe that then?
Just a notation in double brackets, different handwriting around whatever different handwriting.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
We don't need to attribute it to a particular individual. We just need to know that it's different than the main hand.
Right. Then that can be a new research question of whose handwriting is that? That could be something we explore. I would just want to really quickly say hello to anyone else who's viewing, and I had a note that Jim is watching from Amtrak. If you're watching, Jim, and you have any comments based on your experiences in other transcription spaces, especially in wiki transcribing, go ahead and send those questions in as well, or comments if you have any thoughts about these kinds of things while we're working through what we think some of the way ahead on some of these approaches could be. So it sounds to me like we are kind of observing and also making some ideas and moving forward that we would like to keep the description of what is happening in the text in a double bracket. So whether that is something that says strike through, different handwriting, insertion, there are only a few of us at the moment, but we will go ahead and continue and move forward with trying to continue to keep that. Heidi, some of your comments I think will be easily answered, or perhaps best answered by Rick, with relation to tables and charts. We'll come back to that in just a second. I just wanted to return to something that Siobhan mentioned, and also mentioned in her comments, her email comments as well, which is creating the gap or the space between, if you have a double bracketed word and then a letter or something, that it's spaced so that it's visibly clear, so that you really can visually see, as a reviewer especially, you can very clearly see what it is that's being highlighted, I guess, by that.
Right. For example, what we don't want to see is underlines, double bracket A, double bracket / underline, because visually that's really hard to prove.
Right.
But if we have underline double bracket space A space, then that's very clear that this is the string that's underlined.
Right.
Yeah.
So Heidi's question. Actually, Heidi, why don't you describe your question about tables?
Okay, so when I did the Monuments Men documents, first I should say, whenever I go into any of the projects, I always check and see what anyone else has done and try to mimic what they do, rather than go, oh, that's horrible and it's wrong, and I want to do it my way. Okay, so in the Monuments Men, when they started doing the listing of the paintings, for the most part the paintings, they would do use a straight line to separate the different subject matter on the page as you were reading across. In the cactus one, it's kind of like they've got a table, but not a table. So I want to know.
When I did heaps on, it was mainly me, and I had the same problem. I didn't know how to start it, and I did a whole heap of it, and I just didn't know how to do it. So I just basically transcribed it one column at a time in a line, because this is the exact problem I've got too.
Well, I was going to go in and do it based on what I seen in the Monuments Men one, but then I thought, no, somebody's already done everything, so I'm not going to mess it up.
That was me.
Have either of you worked on the clock ledger, the Howard clock?
No, I didn't go near it. It was someone else's, and I went to try and transcribe it the way I thought it should have been done. Just a little amendment, and we had a back and forth go, and I gave up basically, because it was obviously this particular person's precious project that I can understand why they did it the way they did it, but I'm not going to muck around with it if they've spent hours on it, because they've obviously spent hours on it. They love it. I've got projects like that. I'm not going to muck with it if they love it that much.
I think it's interesting. I mean, again, I obviously find a lot of things interesting about transcription, but the fact that every time you go to a page, you can see it through a volunteer's eyes. You can see how they are interpreting the material and how a chart looks to them, even though we're looking at an image. That's very interesting to me. I would say the approach that you're taking so far is what we've recommended, and I think is in line with working in other collaborative spaces like Wikipedia, which is whoever gets there first sets the standard, and then try to follow that standard.
But it'd be nice. I think Heidi's right. It would be nice if we had a consistent across the project's approach for how to deal with columns and tables, because it's not easy.
We are working on a template that will help a new template that would help us when we have tables and charts. One of the problems is not every project not every page. Some projects have pages where there is, like narrative text. And then it changes into a table, and then it changes back to narrative text. So we're trying to come up with a technical solution, and this is having the discussion today is going to help us come up with the descriptive solution that we can include in instructions.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
Right.
And if you set up, like I say, an image of how you want it done, I think that goes a long way. Even because sometimes when you get instructions, I know with the banknote thing, I was following what I thought was I was following the instructions really closely, and I was following them too closely.
Right.
And, like putting in like California, state or something like that, when I didn't need to, and I was corrected on that. But if there was like a picture of a page of the table for that project, and you say this is how we would like it transcribed, then that would be great.
Okay.
I agree with you, Heidi, because I had the same thing with one of the rhododendron project. I call it that because it's rhododendrons just turn up everywhere in it, where they had struck out the
images of rock in China. There's lots
and
of.
I spent ages typing that out.
Rhododendron.
And I didn't have to.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, we can work on making a visual solution, a visual guide that matches the image to maybe project by project. We can make it's easy for us to make specific instructions for projects.
Or just a sample, and if it's easier to correct afterwards, then that makes it easy too.
Maybe what we could do before we get that far is on the pages where we scan ahead of time and identify this is a page that has a table in it. In the notes field, we could put in that sample there.
Right.
So it's right there when somebody goes to that page. The tables are really a really challenging issue, especially because you may have, particularly in pre-printed turn-of-the-century things, you'll have columns, and then you'll have a variety of tables in a single column. And so you're trying to capture all of that, and ASCII is problematic. Straight text is really difficult in order to try and create some kind of alignment there.
That's a great segue. Can I ask you both how you feel and how you're using the notes field on the projects? So remember, the notes field was part of the botany template for quite some time, and then we've recently added into all projects to kind of facilitate some of these issues and these questions around projects.
I think I've used it a few times. Sorry,
you go ahead.
Okay, I've only used it a few times, but I read what other people put in.
Okay.
Sometimes after the fact.
Whereas for me, I tend to use it if there's a particular spelling that I've spent a long time on the internet trying to find out what the spelling is. I'll put it in the notes because I don't want someone else having to go through and search for it. Right. I'll also, if someone comes back and edits my work and I don't think they've done it right, I'll put an explanation in the notes after I've corrected it as to why I've done it the way I've done it, mainly because the transcription center's told me to do it that way, but I'll just explain why I've done it, and then we can go back to our internet fight of re-editing each other until the one person gives up.
Right. That's right. It's a matter of, stay stalwart, defend your position, right? Just kidding. It's all about collaboration. It's about working together.
Exactly.
Well, that's great feedback. I think, Heidi, you mentioned, and Siobhan, I think you mentioned in your email that you sent as well, this idea, and I'd like to mention it in case someone comes back and views this Hangout, the idea of reading what has happened before, reading pages that have already been transcribed to try to help you with interpreting words, especially if you give a visual glance at a page and you see there are some words that don't make sense to you, that you don't seem that legible, but there's already a transcription. You can take a look and say, does that make sense to my eyes, that this is the word that was interpreted, and that can help in going forward. It's a great tip that is something I would want other volunteers to take forward in their reviewing and transcribing as well. So let's see. Siobhan, you mentioned in your feedback email the idea that people do not always, they sometimes just write a question mark if they don't know a word instead of making a guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you speak to that a little bit more?
Again, I think people don't. I mean, I was the same. I don't necessarily read the tips section before I go do something. I just sort of jump in, especially when it's technology. I just think, oh, I'll give it a go. And I think some transcribers are like that. And you get better as you do it. So there will be people out there who are just starting out, who don't necessarily know how to do it, how you guys want a question mark or if you're not sure, to actually how to transcribe it. Once they realise, I think it becomes a lot easier. But I think it's also good if you see a word that you're not sure about, but you can at least tell some of the letters. You know, it may end in A-N-T. It's worth putting those letters in so that the next person who comes along can look at it and then go, oh, of course, it's this word, because not everybody's eye sees the same thing. Yeah.
Right, right. I think I'd like to include that as part of the instructions, to say make your best guess at the word, even if you think even if it's a 12-letter word and you can only read the middle letter and it's T. Like, make your guess.
And just put T question mark, because then someone will come along and go, a T, where's the T? Oh, there, and then read the word, and they can do the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. And I found that as I started into work, and I haven't looked at Joseph Henry's handwriting in a long time, and some of those letters are become recognizable the more you read his handwriting.
You get your eye in.
So I might start with a question mark because I have no idea what any of the letters are in that particular word, and get 5 pages down the road and go, oh, now I know what that word was, and go back. But that may never happen, and so the question mark is valid. When I look at it as a reviewer, I'm looking at the whole thing, and I really love somebody who's taken a stab at it. So we want to encourage that.
Right.
But no worries if they have just put in a question mark.
Yeah. Also want to emphasize that we appreciate any guess and effort at the text as well. So there's no frustration or people being angry that a word is wrong from the organizations who are sharing the materials. We're very happy to have anything that we can work with and start trying to decipher by context.
On that note, if they've miswritten something, like Solomon Brown is not always the best speller,
right?
We want what Solomon Brown wrote, not the correct spelling.
Correct. Right, so do not correct the spelling mistakes. Heidi, I'm not sure if you were able to listen when we were kind of talking a little bit about the end page and start of the page, but you did tweet and ask the question about annotations in the margins, and would you just explain that a little bit more, and we'll see what has come across the projects for Rick as he's been approving them.
Okay, so the person has written on the page the normal whatever they're going to write, but either after the fact or it's a way of them doing something, they've written something in the margin that probably pertains to what's on the page, but maybe it's just like their own little table of contents. So do you put it, like if they have something at the top of the page, do you put it at the top of the page and say, square brackets, margin, and then the information, and then the square brackets on the other side? Or do you try to fit it in where it fits in on the page? I find that very hard to read when it's other people.
I think Leo Bakelin is a good example of someone who was writing a lot of notes in the margins, who's constantly making notes, so figuring out where to insert that. That happens to be a project that's not one of Rick's projects, but we could definitely have a discussion about how we think we want to make advice about that particular situation. When you're reviewing it and you've seen the way other people have done it, what have they done, and how do you feel about that?
It's kind of where it is, but when I'm reading it, it seems to be visually it would be in a different spot. So I'm reading through somebody's transcription, and when I see the margin notes, they don't, to me, a lot of times appear where logically I would think that they would be inserted if they're going to be inserted into a text, into the main text. So the way I work it would be all the main stuff and then all the ephemeral stuff, just because that's how my brain works. So I'm going to look at okay, this is the person's the reason that they're writing on the page, and these are all the little things that they're adding to it. And as when I do research on my own, that's how I tend to look for things and how I set things up.
And I like that approach because when I'm thinking as a computer to index these strings, this makes sure that the string is not interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And while sometimes it's really clear where the annotations belong, what they're associated with, and that's not always right, and it's really hard as somebody proofing it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's less clear, to really, we naturally want to find where that place is, and that can be difficult. I have a journal that I'm preparing to put up by a guy named Brefnesque, and he's well known for being a crosswriter. So that's going to be interesting to see how we do that, right? Because he writes top to bottom, and then he flips the book and writes bottom to top, and then he does annotations on the side, and it's going to be really interesting. And I think we're going to
that will be every Monday Mind Melter for many weeks.
Yeah.
Challenging. The thing is, I mean, he's an extreme, but if you treated the side panels like headers and footers, that might be a way of dealing with them.
Right.
So if they're on, say, on the left-hand side, treat them like headers, and if they're on the right-hand side, treat them like footers. Right. If that's a way of dealing with it, for me, that's how I would deal with it logically.
So if we had something like annotation left margin, annotation right margin.
Yes.
I think that makes sense. My only hesitance. Sorry, Siobhan, go ahead.
No, it's baffled me as well because I've tried to put, it's a debate between where you put the text, I think, because you're wanting to be told, you were saying how sometimes for researchers, you want to know what they're actually writing and where they're actually writing. It's not so much the content of it. So previously I've ended up trying to put the margin note in the most appropriate place in the text that it relates to, but indicating it's been in the margin, even though it might be, 2 lines down from the where I'm inserting it. Yeah. So it's quite difficult. I can see why you want to separate it out. And Heidi's got a really good idea. Yeah, I'm just wondering how to do it.
Yeah, it's when I often do this when I think about how a researcher is writing. I think about, well, what did I do when I'm making notes, when I'm in the field making notes, observing things? How do I do it as an anthropologist? How do I do it? I'll write what I'm doing, and then often I'll go back and add notes. So those notes in the margins are related to those comments. But sometimes I also might write down numbers on the side and be doing math, and that's not related at all. But how do we make the decision?
Right, or you're just using available space.
Right. Or I think I'm gonna rip out that little corner of paper and forget to, or something like that. Yeah.
What if you did the annotation, or like the margin annotations, say top or bottom of your transcription, but where they fit in the actual document, you say annotation 1 or annotation 2.
So it does end up being like footnotes, in essence.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could definitely try it as a test on a project.
Yeah, it sounds a little complicated, but it might work.
Yeah. I definitely think, this is the way that we iterate these kinds of solutions and try to figure out whether or not they actually are solutions if they work for us. That's definitely something we'll continue to think about as well. Like maybe we can try to find that project that would be a good test project to try that particular approach with.
The more I think about it, the more I like that approach, because you can stick that annotation 1, annotation 2 at the end of a sentence. You're not losing that string searchability.
Yeah.
I think I like that. I think that's a great idea.
Great. Before we head into next week's 7-day review challenge, which I'm very excited we'll get a chance to do again, we have a lot of materials that are in the transcribed state and need some review. I wanted to ask some questions about a couple of things. from you both and anyone else who is watching, how do you find, when you come to the Transcription Center, how do you find a project that you want to work on? If you're not returning to a project you've been working on, what sort of, if you wouldn't mind walking me through your pathway of how you find a project, whether that's you go to the browse, you go to what other people are working on, you search.
You see what's on Twitter and who's doing
That's
what.
right. Yeah, you follow.
I don't tend to look at Twitter. I tend to go through, once I've finished a project, I tend to get obsessed for a start, and I tend to get obsessed about only certain projects. They've got to win me over, and once I'm obsessed, I'll do it for hours because I just want to know what happens next. But it's a rare project that actually gets me that obsessed, and they have to be a good writer to be able to get me that obsessed about it. The data entry ones I tend to do while listening to podcasts or watching I like professional cycling, so I'll watch cycling and just do the data entry while I'm watching the cycling. That's fine. But the ones that I really love are the field journals, and the descriptive field journals where you get taken on this journey. And they don't have to write much, but so long as they get you visualizing stuff, that's the ones I get, and I really enjoy doing. The way I find them is to basically just wander around like a bee. I'll try everything. I'll go in and start transcribing, and if they're a good writer, you can normally tell after 2 or 3 pages that you like the person, they're enjoyable to read, and they don't even have to be a easy person to read, because after 3 pages, normally your eye's in, and that's it. I'm sucked in. But it's a rare project that it gets me that obsessed. Most of the time it'll be ones dealing with the cacti project. I wouldn't normally have fallen in love with that project had it not been for the fact that these mystery women keep turning up.
Right. And
that's the reason I ended up just obsessing about it, because I kept wondering, who's going to be next, and can I find out about them? It was more my own internal curiosity rather than the actual project itself.
Florence Bailey is much easier to read than Ben Walsh.
Oh, God. Because I didn't find Florence easy at all. Oh, no.
Oh, I loved her writing. She's an artist.
Oh,
really.
I love her actual content, but the way she writes words, I've got difficulty reading it.
Yeah, he worked on Ben Walsh's journals about collecting bugs on the Mississippi.
No. Oh, yeah.
Gosh. It's dense, and
he's actually, as he writes, as a writer, he's easy to read. It's just that one I do when I really want to challenge, because if you want to teach yourself how to transcribe and teach yourself how to do the tips, you've got to know the tips before you even start that project, because
Benjamin Walsh,
he's all over the place.
The things we've talked about. He has lots of insertions, different pen color, different pieces of paper being added in, annotations.
He's got images, he's got descriptions of images, he's got legends to do with those, and he then sticks them over the top of his script, which is another issue. What do you do then? I mean, he's insane. But it's great to do, because he teaches you how to transcribe. After doing 2 or 3 pages of him, you can do
Heidi, when you started, I'm sorry, Siobhan, I didn't mean to talk over the top.
That's right.
When you started, Heidi, I think you were doing the numismatics projects, the currency.
Yes, and I just see that the whole new boxes have gone up, so I'll be doing that later on.
Great. And I think I'll give you a little hint that there will be more coming.
Yay!
In the July and August timeframe, because we have another rapid capture pilot. So
great. I got involved. I had started with a couple of journals, and I found them good. But the thing I like about the banknotes is there is really no interpretation. You just do it. Now, and I watch television while I do it, and I was laid off from work, so I got a chance to do a bunch of it, and it was very relaxing for me. And then because I'm not from the States, I found all these interesting little town names, which, like Citronella. Whoever would think of it, living in a town called Citronella? I loved it. And then you read towns of, that you hear in music lyrics and things like that. And then the San Francisco thing where you're going to get $10 in gold. Mm-hmm. Bring this note into the bank and you will get $10 in gold. I love that.
I'd like
So-
$10 in gold.
Yeah, I'd like $10 in gold too.
And then I thought, well, if somebody has that now, would they get the $10 in gold if they went to the bank? Does that bank even exist anymore?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the thing about the currency proof sheets is they are I don't even know how many versions of local currency there were, but this was the step toward creating one national currency, right? So now the banks are issuing them individually, but they are still now affiliated with a national program of currency. I will not speak to that project as an expert at all because I don't know enough, and we have many people who know much more about numismatics in general who could give us a wonderful tutorial. Maybe they could give us a contribute and connect. We could do some projects, and they'll come and share with us. See if
That'd be cool.
But what it sounds like as I'm listening to both of you is that you enjoy a good writer.
Yeah.
And you will spend a lot of time with a good writer. The other ones you may spend time with, but it's while you're doing something else.
True.
Yeah.
If it requires less interpretation, the more you'll spend time in the middle of watching the Giro d'Italia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yep.
That you'll spend on that particular task.
Yeah.
Well,
I just type away while watching. I mean, it's easy data entry, keeps my brain entertained, and I'm doing two things at once, which satisfies me. So, but the ones that intellectually stimulate me are the ones that I do tend to obsess over and spend days on and can do in 3 days.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we're starting to approach an hour. I know we started a little bit late, but I don't want to keep anyone too much longer. But I just wanted to ask some questions about how can we make our tips more easily accessible, or how can we share them with people, the instructions and the tips, both for new volunteers who are coming in, so that I very clearly understand and believe, just as you say, that you learn by doing in the transcription center. You certainly learn what's happening and how to do things by getting in there and doing it. But at the same time, we want to make it easier for them to find it. And then secondly, as we approach this next week's 7-day review challenge, if there's anything that you think we could share out with our fellow volunteers on being a little bit more efficient or effective at that, any observations that you've made in participating in the previous 7-day review challenges?
Oh. Not really. Not for me.
No, other than pointing them towards the tip section and saying read it might be a good sort of start. But I don't want to put people off. I don't want us to end up like Wikipedia, where I don't do Wikipedia. I haven't even attempted Wikipedia, and I don't think I ever will, because I'm put off by its reputation of being a edit Nazi. So I prefer.
They are definitely working. They're making conscious efforts. I will say they're making conscious efforts to make new editors more welcome. But I agree.
I know. But
I want to make it very easy. Well, this is the thing. We purposefully made it.
I don't want to put people off.
Yeah, we made it a program that anybody can transcribe. You don't have to even have an account. You can be anonymous. We want to make it easy, and hopefully the process of peer review captures any miscommunications or errors in transcribing, and also the process of transcribing itself teaches you to be more effective, or teaches you your own personal learning strategies for being in a project when you're transcribing. And I know many of you have given feedback to us about, I keep an extra page and I keep notes about the project as I'm working, and that helps me be more effective in figuring out letters and place names and taxonomies and things like that. Rick, did you have any questions that you'd like to ask?
Oh, I know something. You might want to put in the tip sheet. Just today. Now, I've been using a computer since the late 80s. I'm on a Mac, on a laptop. Now, it's not easy to figure out how to do accents and things. And finally today, I've actually all you do is you hold down the letter, and a little thing will pop up, and it'll show you the different accents for the letters. So, because it's not like Windows, because I'm on a Mac, where Windows you just go in and you go into symbols and you change the font. But in the browser, I was doing things and not adding accents because I didn't know how to add accents.
Yeah.
And today I find you just hold down the key. So if you put that in, I think that will make a big difference, believe it or not.
Great. We had a comment from Matthew as well on Twitter saying the same thing, that he was concerned with reviewing where people are not including those special characters that are that can be created easily with a keyboard, depending on that. So
I actually didn't do some projects because they were accent heavy, and I didn't know how to put the accents in.
Right.
Which is kind of stupid since I'm pretty tech savvy.
Yeah. Right. Have either of you worked in the C.W. Bishop, the China archaeological?
Yeah.
How have you handled, just wondering for some feedback purposes, how have you handled the Chinese characters in that project?
Oh my gosh.
There's a person who obviously knows how to do it.
Okay.
I'm hoping that they'll come back and review, because I've ended up putting square brackets, 2 Chinese characters, 4 Chinese characters. You know, I've just got no idea how to accent them. But someone does, because they've gone and found them.
Yeah, there's both the way of transitioning your keyboard to have Chinese characters on it, so it would like pop, same kind of way that if you hold the key down, it will show you the character. But there are also some mobile apps that allow you to draw what you see, and that pulls up the Chinese character as well. But we did also expect that it probably would be people who had a little bit more either Chinese language skills or subject matter expertise in RAW. So.
I reviewed a couple, and I found that what I was putting in was, I was just saying Chinese symbols, but the people that were some of the people that were doing the Chinese characters, when I looked at the symbol drawn and the Chinese characters, they were not equivalent as far as I was concerned. And I don't know if that is because this is brush stroke or something, and this is like the computer equivalent. I don't know. So I was just assuming that the person knew what they were talking about.
Okay. Well, again, this is one of the reasons that we hope to get to, every time we have a project, we're hoping that it gets to an 85% solution. And actually, the dedication that you all show as volunteers and in the review process with each other is taking it to a much higher quality. It just tends to be an issue of these sorts of things that are either they're a language issue or they are something to do with specific subject matter expertise. That's when we bring in the people who have that subject matter expertise to do the final approving as well. All right, well, I will go ahead and take some of these suggestions forward and hopefully have the opportunity to adjust the tips before we start the 7-day review challenge. Is there any other thoughts about the 7-day review challenge before we?
No, I like the competitive nature of it, but that's my type of personality.
I'm going.
I always want to beat it. Always want to get the best.
Right. So it was 12:02 last time. So we'll see. If
I know it's a hard ask.
We'll do better. I won't do Farmville quite as much and put some more time.
Good plan. Good plan. I'll see if I can get out of going to meetings so that I can put in more time.
Oh yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining me today, and Rick as well. And again, if we leave this discussion and you think of some other questions or some other recommendations, you can share those back out, and we'll see if we can maybe make this a monthly or every month and a half event where we can go over what's been happening in the Transcription Center and as a community, how we're learning to use this system. It's a process of learning and discovery for us as well in designing the system and making the system work more effectively for the volunteers and for the organizations that are participating and putting their materials in. And I just can't even begin to thank you enough for joining us and for giving your feedback and constantly updating us if there are problems with the system or issues with projects as well. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Nice to meet you both.
Nice
all
to
three.
meet you too.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.